What makes a person simply vanish from the world without a trace? Is it a calculated act? A random moment of fate? Or something far more sinister, hidden in the quiet folds of everyday life? Sometimes, it's not the brutality of a crime that stays with us, but the silence that follows. The questions that hang in the air for decades. The memories of someone once vibrant and full of life, reduced to a file gathering dust in a forgotten drawer. This is the case of Rachael Edwards, a woman whose life seemed perfectly ordinary until one winter evening it wasn't. One moment she was there, living in the heartbeat of a small town. The next, she was gone. No calls, no letters, no goodbyes, and more chillingly, no answers. It was 1993, the kind of year where communities still trusted each other, where neighbors waved from porches and children played until dusk. Rachael, only 27 years old, was building her life quietly in the modest town of Somerset, Pennsylvania. She wasn't famous. She wasn't flashy. But she mattered to her friends, her family, and to a community that still struggles to speak her name without feeling that familiar ache of unfinished grief. Her story isn't filled with sensational twists or a flurry of tabloid headlines. In fact, what makes Rachael's case so haunting is how little we truly know. How quickly the trail grew cold. How often her name was met with shrugs, even within her own neighborhood to this day. Her disappearance remains one of Somerset County's most baffling mysteries. No body has ever been found. No one has ever been charged. And yet, those who knew her, and even some who didn't, believe something terrible happened. Something that was never supposed to be discovered. And so, together, we return to this quiet, snow-covered town, where whispers of the past still echo between old brick buildings and long-forgotten memories. We'll walk in Rachael's footsteps, examine the night she vanished, and revisit the theories that have tried to make sense of the senseless, because sometimes the only way to honor the missing is to remember them. This is the unsolved mystery of Rachael Edwards, and it still haunts us, even now. When you look at old photographs of Rachael Edwards, it's hard not to smile with her. There's something unassuming in her expression, a softness in the curve of her mouth, a spark in her eyes that suggests kindness, humility, and just a touch of mischief. She wasn't famous, wealthy, or trying to be anything other than exactly who she was, and somehow that made her unforgettable. Born in 1966, Rachael grew up in the rolling hills of Somerset County, Pennsylvania, a region known for its farmland, quiet towns, and deep-rooted community values. Her parents, Thomas and Elaine Edwards, were lifelong residents, grounded people who believed in hard work, Sunday dinners, and always answering the phone when someone called for help. The Edwards home wasn't extravagant, but it was warm. White clapboard house with green shutters and a wraparound porch that always smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. Rachael was the eldest of 3 siblings, a natural caretaker from a young age. Her sister, Amanda, often described her as the glue that held everyone together, whether it was packing school lunches for her younger brothers or staying up late to help Amanda finish a science project. Rachael had an innate sense of responsibility. But more than that, she was generous with her time. Even when she didn't have much of it to give, she wasn't a loud presence, not the type to command a room. But people noticed her. Perhaps it was the way she listened, really listened, when someone talked. Or maybe it was her quiet persistence, the kind of steadiness that made you feel like you could lean on her and never worry about falling. After high school, Rachael didn't go far. She enrolled at Cambria County Community College, where she took night classes while working days as a receptionist at a dental clinic in downtown Somerset. It wasn't glamorous work, but she was proud of it. She liked organizing things, making patients feel at ease, and most of all, being part of something that helped people. She lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. She decorated it with thrifted furniture, soft pastel curtains, and stacks of second-hand books. Her favorite was To Kill a Mockingbird, which she read every spring without fail. Rachel's social life was equally modest. She had a small circle of close friends, women she'd known since school, a few coworkers, and her cousin Jenny, who was also her best friend. On weekends, they'd gather for card games, movie nights, or the occasional drive to the diner on Route 31 for pie and coffee. Rachel didn't drink much. She wasn't into the bar scene, but she loved live music, especially folk and old school. Country. There was a local band that played on Friday nights at a pub in town, and if she didn't have to work late, she'd be there in the back, swaying to the rhythm, quiet and content. She had once been engaged, briefly, in her early 20s. His name was Brandon Keller, a mechanic who lived a few towns over. They met through a friend of a friend, and for a while, things seemed serious. But something changed, slowly, and then all at once. Rachel broke off the engagement in 1990, citing vague reasons. "We just weren't right for each other," she told friends. She never spoke ill of Brandon, but she didn't speak much of him at all after that. They went their separate ways, and Rachel didn't date much after. By 1993, Rachel was 27, settled, and in some ways still searching. She was talking about going back to school, maybe studying dental hygiene, or even early childhood education. "I just want to do something that matters," she told Amanda. One evening, but she was in no rush. Life was comfortable, steady, maybe even predictable. And for a woman like Rachel, that was okay. She wasn't chasing adventure or drama. She found joy in small routines, watering her windowsill plants, writing letters by hand, baking her mother's apple bread on weekends. That's what makes what happened next so difficult to grasp. There were no warning signs, no cryptic journal entries, no secret enemies or whispers of danger. Rachel was grounded, emotionally, socially, even financially. She wasn't running from anything, nor was she chasing some secret double life. She was simply present, and then, suddenly, she wasn't. When people in town first heard the news that Rachel hadn't shown up for work on Monday, February 22nd, they assumed it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she was sick. Maybe her car broke down. But as the hours stretched into a day, then two, then a week, something shifted. Concern gave way to unease. Friends began retracing their steps. Family members made late-night calls. And everyone kept coming back to the same confounding truth. Rachael Edwards was gone? Not just missing, but vanished, with no signs of struggle, no witnesses, and no clear reason why. She wasn't the kind of person to disappear. She was the kind of person who showed up, always. And that's exactly what makes her story so terrifying. Because if someone like Rachel, so ordinary, so grounded, could vanish, then maybe none of us are as safe as we think. It was a quiet, overcast Sunday, February 21st, 1993, the kind of day when small-town life moves even slower than usual. In Somerset, Pennsylvania, the streets were still wet from a light snowfall the night before. Church bells chimed at noon, and neighbors nodded politely as they passed each other in the cold. For most, it was an unremarkable day. But for Rachael Edwards, it would be her last known day on record, the final confirmed moments before her life was swallowed by a mystery that remains unresolved to this day. We can begin piecing together her movements from around 11:15 a.m., when she was seen leaving First United Methodist Church downtown. Rachel attended service most Sundays, always sat in the third pew from the front, on the left-hand side. Several parishioners later recalled that she seemed normal that morning. She wore a navy wool coat and had brought her usual worn, leather-bound Bible. One member of the choir, remembered her humming along softly during the final hymn. Another noted that she left with a gentle wave, purse tucked under one arm, heading in the direction of her car, a 1986 blue Dodge Aries. By 11:45 a.m., Rachel stopped at Mooney's Market, a small grocery store a few blocks from her apartment. Surveillance footage, grainy and in black and white, captured her at the register. She bought milk, a loaf of bread, a can of tomato, soup, and a pack of tea lights. The clerk remembered her because she asked if the candles were still on sale. She smiled and said she was planning a quiet evening to herself, the clerk recalled. Said it was a good day for soup and a book. At 12:30 p.m., Rachel called her sister Amanda. The two talked for around 18 minutes. Amanda would later describe the conversation as totally normal. They discussed their mother's birthday coming up in March, a new recipe Amanda had tried, and whether Rachel had mailed the Valentine's card for their niece. Nothing about the call raised alarm. In fact, Amanda said Rachel sounded peaceful, like she was looking forward to the rest of her day. Sometime between 1 o'clock and 2 p.m., neighbors heard the sound of Rachel's car pulling into the narrow alley behind her apartment. A resident in the building next door, Mrs. Dolores Hatch, said she saw Rachel carrying groceries inside. She had her purse over her shoulder and a brown paper bag in each hand, Mrs. Hatch told investigators. She nodded at me. Nothing seemed out of place. And then silence. That was the last confirmed sighting of Rachael Edwards. By Monday morning, when she didn't show up for work at Dr. Yelverton's dental office, people noticed almost immediately. Rachel was reliable to a fault, always punctual, always professional. When she hadn't called in or answered her phone by 10 a.m., her coworker Sandy Blakely drove by her apartment during lunch. The car, her Dodge Aries, was parked exactly where it had been the day before. The mail from Saturday still sat in the slot on the building's main door. Sandy knocked. No answer. She waited a few minutes, then drove back to work, assuming maybe Rachel was sick and resting. But when Tuesday came and still no word, no calls, no voicemails, no sign of movement, alarm bells started to ring. Amanda called repeatedly. Friends left messages. By 5 p.m., Amanda drove the hour and a half from Harrisburg and filed a missing person report with the Somerset Police Department. Police arrived at Rachel's apartment around 6:15 p.m. The front door was locked. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. Nothing disturbed. Inside, everything was eerily in order. The groceries she had purchased Sunday were neatly stored. In the kitchen, the tomato soup can was on the counter. A mug sat next to the stove, rinsed but still damp. The tea lights had been placed in a small ceramic dish on her coffee table. Unlit, but here's where things take a strange turn. In her bedroom, investigators found her purse. Inside, her wallet, keys, and checkbook. Her coat was hung on the hook by the door. Her shoes, the ones she had been wearing at the store, were neatly placed on the rug. Her glasses were on her nightstand. And on her bed was her favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird, open to a page in the middle, face down as if she'd stepped away for just a moment. But Rachel was gone. No sign of struggle. No note, no blood, no broken glass. Just a perfectly ordinary Sunday scene with one piece missing. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood. Mrs. Hatch, the neighbor, said she hadn't heard anything unusual. No arguments, no loud noises. Other tenants in the building echoed the same. The alley behind the building had no cameras, and the weather had erased any potential footprints or tire marks. The last potential sighting, though unconfirmed, came from a teenager named Kyle Whitaker, who claimed he saw a woman who looked like Rachel standing near the payphone outside Ridge's pharmacy at around 3:45 p.m. that Sunday. He remembered her because she seemed anxious. kept glancing over her shoulder. But his memory wasn't clear, and no surveillance footage was recovered to corroborate it. Investigators were left with a handful of mundane timestamps and an overwhelming absence of evidence. So what happened between 1:30 p.m. and Monday morning? Did someone she knew come to the door? Was she lured outside, perhaps expecting someone familiar? Did she leave willingly, only to meet with danger shortly after? One fact remained clear. Whatever happened to Rachael happened quickly. And if someone came for her, they left no trace. In a town where most people left their doors unlocked, the possibility that someone could vanish so cleanly, so completely, felt like something out of a novel. But this wasn't fiction. It was real. And for those who loved Rachael, stillness inside her apartment wasn't just eerie. It was horrifying, because sometimes it's not the noise that signals danger, it's the silence that follows. When Rachael Edwards was officially reported missing on the evening of February 22, 1993, the Somerset Police Department responded swiftly, at least by small-town standards. At first, the tone of the investigation was cautious. After all, adults disappear all the time, and sometimes they leave by choice. But as officers stepped into her apartment that evening, what they found, or rather, what they didn't, made something immediately clear. Rachael hadn't packed a bag. She hadn't taken money, ID, or even her glasses. There were no signs of preparation, no notes, no plans left behind. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. Detective Greg Yoder, a 17-year veteran of the force, took the lead. He later described walking through Rachael's living room as stepping into a moment frozen in time. There was no struggle, no forced entry. The kettle on the stove had been used, slightly warm when Amanda arrived earlier. Rachael's keys, purse, and shoes were all in place. The first 48 hours are always crucial in any missing person investigation, and Somerset PD acted accordingly. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed every resident in Rachael's apartment complex, and traced her movements on Sunday as far as they could. What emerged was a frustratingly simple timeline ending in a dead stop. They spoke to Mrs. Dolores Hatch, the neighbor who saw Rachael carrying groceries into her apartment around 1:30 p.m. They verified the surveillance footage from Mooney's Market, time-stamped at 11:48 a.m., and showing Rachael's purchase. They even confirmed the phone call to her sister Amanda, lasting just under 20 minutes, and logged through the local landline exchange. But beyond those points, the trail faded quickly. One of the first people questioned was James Brenner, Rachael's ex-boyfriend. The two had dated for nearly 2 years and had ended things amicably the previous fall. James was cooperative, almost too cooperative, some noted, and willingly submitted to questioning. He had an alibi for the day Rachael disappeared. He was visiting family in Altoona, a 2-hour drive away. His relatives confirmed it, and gas station receipts placed him there. Police found no history of domestic disputes, no threatening messages, no lingering obsessions, but others weren't so easily ruled out. Wayne Crocker, a maintenance worker for the apartment complex, became an early person of interest. According to building records, he had entered Rachael's building earlier that week to repair a water heater in the basement. A tenant reported seeing Wayne hanging around longer than he needed to. When police questioned him, he was nervous, evasive, but again, nothing concrete linked him to Rachael. His fingerprints were on the basement door, but nowhere near Rachael's apartment. No criminal record, no strong motive. Then there was Kyle Whitaker, the teenage boy who claimed to have seen someone matching Rachael's description near a payphone outside Ridge's Pharmacy at Sunday afternoon. Kyle described the woman as looking scared and glancing around like she was waiting for someone. But Kyle's account had inconsistencies. At first, he said he saw her around 4 p.m., but later changed the time to closer to 3:30. He couldn't say for sure it was Rachael. And crucially, no phone call from that payphone was ever linked back to her. Still, police kept that clue open, one of the few that offered any potential movement. Forensic analysis at the apartment turned up almost nothing. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints that didn't belong. The apartment had been untouched for nearly 24 hours before police were called, which hampered any potential DNA evidence. Back in 1993, DNA testing was still in its infancy, and trace analysis was limited by both technology and budget. They dusted for prints, tested carpet fibers, even examined the locks on the front and back doors. Everything came back clean. Her car was towed and searched. Again, nothing suspicious. The driver's seat was in her usual position. Nothing was missing from the glove compartment, and no signs of forced entry. Police began to consider, had Rachael voluntarily let someone inside? Someone she knew? Trusted? But if she had, why would she leave her wallet and glasses behind? Why not lock the door after herself? Why was the tea light package still unopened? By midweek, local media had picked up the story. Local woman vanishes without a trace. Read the Somerset Daily American headline on Wednesday, February 24th. The article included a photo of Rachael smiling in front of a bookshelf, taken just a month earlier at a New Year's gathering. She looked peaceful, joyful even. Public reaction was immediate. Posters were put up across town. Volunteers distributed flyers at truck stops, gas stations, and along nearby interstates. Her photo aired on local news stations and even made a brief appearance on Pittsburgh's Whoopsie, drawing wider attention. But the initial wave of concern was followed quickly by something colder: silence. Days turned into weeks. The tips stopped coming. The case faded from headlines. Several leads, all later dismissed, consumed valuable time. One caller claimed to have seen a woman matching Rachael's description boarding a Greyhound bus to Cleveland. Another said she may have been spotted in Erie, working at a bookstore under a different name. Both turned out to be unrelated. More bizarrely, a man in Johnstown claimed he had visions of where Rachael's body was buried. Police did a cursory check of the wooded area he described. Nothing was found. Then came a more unsettling lead. A woman named Pamela Reese, who worked with Rachael briefly at the dental office before leaving the job a year earlier. Pamela came forward weeks later, claiming that Rachael had told her she had a bad feeling about someone. Pamela couldn't remember who, just that Rachael mentioned someone from her building was giving her the creeps. Police tried to follow that up. They re-interviewed tenants, rechecked maintenance records, and reviewed any complaints Rachael had made to management. Nothing. It was a chilling suggestion, but ultimately another dead end. As the case grew, colder, public frustration mounted. People began to wonder aloud whether the Somerset police had missed something early on. Why didn't they secure the building immediately? Why wasn't the alley behind her apartment checked more thoroughly? There was also criticism about how long it took for state-level support to be requested. The Pennsylvania State Police weren't formally involved until mid-March, nearly 3 weeks after Rachael vanished. Detective Yoder defended his team, stating, "There was no evidence of foul play, no forced entry. We had nothing to suggest a crime had even occurred. We treated it like a disappearance until proven otherwise." But to Rachael's family and much of the town, it felt like something more, something darker. In 2001, almost a decade after the disappearance, Rachael's case was quietly moved to the inactive file dot. It was never formally closed. But without new leads, forensic evidence, or confessions, it simply sat dot in 2013, a new cold case unit. Within the Pennsylvania State Police briefly re-examined the file. They digitized old notes, ran some items through updated forensic testing, and conducted several re-interviews. Nothing new came of it. Rachel's DNA is still listed in NIMS, the National Database for Missing Persons. Her dental records remain available. Her file occasionally circulates in forums and subreddits, but to date, not a single confirmed sighting has ever been made. And just like that, the investigation, once so active, so urgent, gradually faded into stillness. The kind of stillness that surrounds a story, not because it's ended, but because it was never finished. When a person vanishes without a trace, the mind naturally reaches for the most straightforward explanation. And in the case of Rachael Edwards, many believe the obvious answer was standing right in front of investigators all along. The most widely accepted theory, even among those closest to her, points to one man, James Brenner, Rachel's ex-boyfriend. On the surface, James didn't seem like the typical suspect. There were no known domestic disputes, no restraining orders, no threats made in public. Their breakup, by most accounts, had been civil. They dated for nearly 2 years, shared mutual friends, and even bumped into each other from time to time after separating in late 1992. But as any investigator will tell you, appearances can be deceiving, and relationships, especially those that end, are rarely as clean-cut as they seem. Many believe James had motive. Though he denied any lingering feelings, friends close to Rachel said he had been having a hard time letting go. A coworker recalled Rachel mentioning that James had dropped by her apartment unannounced twice in January, just to talk. She found it uncomfortable, but chalked it up to him adjusting to the breakup. Another friend, Donna McAllister, claimed Rachel once said, "James keeps saying we were meant to be together. Like, ... he's not done yet." It's not exactly damning, but it does cast a shadow over the friendly ex-boyfriend persona James projected to police. Then there's means. James knew where Rachel lived. He had been to her apartment countless times. He knew her routines, when she worked, what days she went shopping, when her sister usually called. If anyone could have approached Rachel without triggering alarm, it was James. And if she let him in willingly, as the lack of forced entry suggests, it would make perfect sense. Finally, opportunity. This is where the theory begins to fray. James had an alibi. According to police, he was in Altoona on the day Rachel disappeared, roughly 2 hours away. His family confirmed his presence there, and gas station receipts backed it up. But many believe the timeline still leaves a crucial gap. If James left Altoona early enough, he could have made it to Somerset and back without raising suspicion. It's tight, yes, but not impossible. There's also the unsettling fact that James called Rachel's sister, Amanda, 2 days after the disappearance, before the media had widely picked up the story. According to Amanda, James sounded weirdly calm and asked, "Have you heard from her yet?" Amanda thought it was odd. Why would he be checking in unless he knew something was wrong? James claimed he was just trying to be helpful. But many see that as an early misstep, a slip of the tongue from someone who knew more than he let on. But here's the thing. There's no physical evidence tying James to the disappearance. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no suspicious behavior caught on surveillance. His vehicle was searched. Nothing. His apartment clean. Police even conducted multiple interviews with him in the weeks following the case. Each time he stuck to the same story. Calm, clear, collected. If he was guilty, he was remarkably composed. And then there's this. Would a guilty man insert himself so cooperatively into the investigation? James never lawyered up. He never refused a question. Some argue that's a classic move, staying close to the case to monitor progress. But others see it differently, as the actions of someone who is truly innocent and wanted to help. Another strike against the James theory is lack of escalation. If James were truly violent, wouldn't there have been signs before? Threats, controlling behavior, outbursts? There were none, at least none on record. Rachael never reported him to police, never told friends she felt endangered. She might have found him clingy or persistent, but not threatening. Still, even with no hard evidence, the shadow of suspicion never left James. In the years that followed, he stayed in Somerset, quietly working as an auto mechanic. He never remarried, never moved away, and never spoke publicly about the case. When a local journalist approached him in 2005, James reportedly said, "I think about her every day. But that doesn't mean I know what happened." So we're left with this: a man with motive, means, and potential opportunity, but no direct evidence. A clean apartment, a cooperative alibi, a face that never cracks. Many believe James Brenner is the obvious answer, that he snapped in a moment of rejection or emotional desperation and found a way to make Rachael disappear. But then again, there's something that doesn't quite add up. If he did it, where's the trace? The scene? The slip-up? And if he didn't, why does everything feel like it circles back to him? When conventional explanations fall short, the mind begins to drift toward darker, more unsettling possibilities. Not because we want to believe in monsters, but because sometimes the real world refuses to offer anything rational. In Rachael Edwards' case, there's a second theory, far less discussed, yet strangely persistent, that paints a chilling picture of what might have happened. This theory doesn't point to a boyfriend. It doesn't focus on someone she knew. Instead, it suggests something more random, more terrifying, that Rachael Edwards may have been the victim of a targeted abduction by a stranger, someone who had been watching her for some time. It's a theory that begins not with her disappearance, but with the weeks leading up to it. Rachael had mentioned to her coworker, Bethany, that she felt like someone had been hanging around her apartment building. She described a dark-colored vehicle, possibly a van or SUV, parked across the street on multiple evenings in January. She said it didn't belong to any of her neighbors, and she never saw anyone get out. It creeped her out, Bethany later told police, but she thought maybe she was just being paranoid. Could it have been nothing? Of course, but it's hard not to wonder if someone had been watching her patterns, waiting for the right moment. Rachael lived alone, and her work schedule was consistent, out by 7:30 a.m., home by 6 p.m. On the day she vanished, there was no sign of forced entry. Her neighbors heard nothing. No screams, no struggle. Could it be possible that someone lured her outside, or perhaps followed her in? Another thread in this theory connects to a string of disappearances that occurred across Pennsylvania in the early 1990s, all involving women between 20 and 30, all with similar builds and appearances to Rachael. In most cases, the women vanished without a trace. No bodies, no suspects, no answers. The media never officially linked the cases, and police departments often dismissed the idea of a connection due to jurisdictional boundaries and lack of shared evidence. But some independent researchers noticed eerie similarities. One such case occurred in Ebensburg, just 50 miles from Somerset, where a 26-year-old nurse named Lisa Harmon vanished in November 1991 after finishing a late shift at the hospital. Like Rachael, her apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Like Rachael, her car was still in the lot. And like Rachael, she was never seen again? Could these disappearances be part of a pattern? Some theorists believe so, though police have never confirmed a serial predator was active in the region at the time. Still, it's difficult to ignore the growing map of red pins across the state, each one a young woman, gone without explanation between 1989 and 1994. Even more unsettling is an anonymous tip that came into the Somerset Police Department in 1996. The caller claimed to have seen a man pushing a woman. into a vehicle near Rachel's apartment on the night she went missing. The caller refused to give their name and hung up after describing a beige sedan with a dented rear bumper. Police followed up but found nothing. No plate number, no second call, nothing to verify the claim. And yet, could that one phone call have been the closest we ever got to the truth? Some believe that Rachael may have been taken by a transient predator, someone moving through towns, staying under the radar, never staying long enough to leave a trace. A trucker, a traveling salesman, someone with no connection to Rachael, no reason for suspicion. That kind of crime, cold, calculated, and utterly random, is the hardest to solve. And the hardest to live with? Then there's a more speculative angle, still grounded in fact, yet eerie in implication. Rachael had a brief online presence through university forums and early message boards, which were still novel in the early 90s. A few private messages on her university account, now lost to time, were flagged as odd by her sister, Amanda, who had briefly accessed her email with permission weeks before Rachael vanished. She recalled a username that stood out, Watcher9. No one ever identified who that was? Could it be possible that someone had fixated on her from a distance? Someone who never even met her, until the day they did? Of course, all of this remains speculation. There's no solid evidence to confirm a stalker. No smoking gun to prove a stranger did this. But sometimes the most terrifying truth is also the quietest, that someone can disappear, not because of who they know, but because of who happens to notice them. And that, perhaps, is what makes this theory linger so deeply, not just because it's unexplained, but because it could happen to anyone. Sometimes a story doesn't end, it simply stops, not with resolution or even chaos, but with a deafening silence. And for the family and friends of Rachael Edwards, that silence began in the spring of 1993, and it never truly lifted in. The weeks immediately following Rachael's disappearance, hope remained a fragile but ever-present thread. Police followed leads, interviewed witnesses, and combed the nearby woods. Flyers with her photo young, smiling, full of life, were stapled to trees, pinned on grocery store boards, and handed out at community events. There was a sense that an answer had to be coming, that it was only a matter of time. But time passed, and the trail simply stopped moving. No new tips came in. No body was found. Forensic evidence was minimal and inconclusive, and the two main theories, one involving a known acquaintance, the other a total stranger, both hit dead ends. Every potential suspect had an alibi or a lack of physical evidence tying them to the case. Every promising lead eventually faded into a blur of uncertainty. By the end of 1993, the case officially went cold. But for Amanda Edwards, Rachael's older sister, there was no such thing as cold. For her, every day was a new attempt to keep Rachael's memory alive. She wrote letters to the local newspaper. She called the police station every few weeks, just to check in. She kept the light on in Rachael's old bedroom, just in case. And yet, as years turned into decades, that initial urgency around Rachael's disappearance slowly dissolved into public forgetfulness. The media stopped covering it. Police moved onto more immediate cases. Witnesses grew older. Memories grew fuzzier. Records from the early investigation were misplaced or sealed. Leads that might have meant something in 1993 were now nearly impossible to follow. One anonymous letter arrived at the Somerset Police Department in 1999, typed, unsigned, and postmarked from out of state. It referenced a girl taken near a college and claimed she had been buried where the trees grow crooked. Investigators followed up, even brought in cadaver dogs to search a section of forest outside of town. But nothing was found. No way to trace the letter. No way to prove it wasn't just a cruel hoax. And still, Amanda waited. In 2008, after years of petitioning, Rachel's case was briefly reopened as part of a cold case initiative in Pennsylvania. New detectives looked over the files, hoping that modern forensic techniques might succeed where older ones failed. But so much time had passed. Potential DNA evidence had degraded. Key witnesses were no longer alive. The beige sedan described in that anonymous phone call? Never found. The username Watcher9? Still untraceable. And that eerie sense that something was missed in those early hours. It lingered like smoke with no visible fire. There was one more twist, if you can call it that. In 2015, a man arrested in Ohio on unrelated charges mentioned Rachel's name during an interrogation. Detectives followed up, but his account was inconsistent and unverifiable. He later recanted, saying he had heard her name on TV once, and made it up. Another dead-end dot, and so Rachael Edwards became a name on a list, another cold case, another story with no ending. Her photo now sits in a folder, in a cabinet, in a building where few people remember the girl behind the smile. But Amanda remembers Dot every year on February 21st. She posts the same message on a now quiet Facebook page dedicated to her sister's case. Still waiting, still hoping. You deserve more than silence. And she's right. Because the tragedy of Rachael Edwards isn't just that she vanished, it's that her story was never truly told. The unanswered questions still hang in the air. Why was there no sign of struggle? Who was the man with the dented beige sedan? Was Rachel targeted? Or was it someone she knew? And most of all, why haven't we found her? The trail may be cold, but it's never completely gone. Sometimes it only takes one memory to surface, one tip, one confession, one thread pulled hard enough to unravel it all. Until then, we wait, like Amanda, we hope, and like all those who've lost someone without answers, we remember, because stories like Rachel's don't go away, they haunt. And maybe, just maybe, it can still lead us somewhere. Thank you for spending this time with us as we quietly walk through the haunting mystery of Rachael Edwards, a story that still echoes in the silence she left behind. If you've heard of this case before, or if you have thoughts or theories, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Sometimes, even a small observation can bring a fresh perspective to a story long forgotten. And if you find meaning in these quieter, more reflective true crime investigations, the ones that don't always make headlines, but deserve to be remembered, we invite you to subscribe. Here, we explore the stories that others leave behind. The strange, the chilling, the unresolved. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.